Thank you, David, for the kind introduction. Thanks, everyone, for joining me this evening or this morning. Depends where you are. You mentioned TED series about photography. I think there's a good resources on the web, particularly Stephen Brody gave some talks on this topic. I think it's brilliant. It's worth checking out if you're interested in the background, particularly the work done with TED series in the 60s. Today, I'm only going to focus on the development in China. Actually, that's the place I'm quite familiar with, and that's the place I'm aware this kind of activities. You mentioned I have done the talks in SPR before. Actually, I did a quick search about the history of my talk. This is actually the sixth talks. I've already given 5 ones before. So I'm really grateful for SPR to offer me the opportunity to share some of the thoughts of the research I have done. And so really grateful for the support of everyone in the community. I would like to start with my story, how I get into Psi activities. About 20 years ago, my 2 wisdom tools starts to play up. And I went to the dentist, and they are going to do the operation for me. It's actually, it's not a minor operation. They suggest I need to have a general anesthetic. So I happened to be doing a business trip in China, and one of my friends said, why don't you go to this place to have your wisdom tools taken out? This is where I went. And this is a small place in China. And if you go there, this place has a sort of a mountain of tools. And on the wall, this guy has lots of pictures with celebrities, with officials, and even the members, Chinese Communist Party Politburo members went there to have their tools taken out. So this is quite encouraging to me. And what actually happened is that there is no anesthetic, no blood clotting injection. And all he did is actually use a tweezers to take my teeth out. And after that, we went to lunch. So I was really puzzled. It wasn't much pain, wasn't much blood, actually. But my 2 wisdom tools gone. I actually still keep them. So during the lunch, I asked him what actually happened. What the hell did you do to me? And he said, I have a mantra. It's a 5-syllable mantra. I use that to take tools out people. So I'm still not sure whether he's telling me the truth, but this triggered my interest looking into this kind of weird phenomena. I'm a very curious people by nature, so I'm always very curious. And also my scientific training helps to develop that curiosity. But this really puzzled me for many years, what actually happened. This is a place in London, it's called Wellcome Trust. They have a collection, have a museum. In the museum, one day I just happened to find a signage. This signage is actually a Chinese traditional tooth removing operation. The character used to describe the signage is called tooth release by magical hands. So they use the character release, which is really, it implies it's effortless. So I realized this is actually a tradition which passed down from generations to the generation and is still being practiced in some places in China. So I actually look into the history of China about Chinese medicine practice. What you can find is that many legendary Chinese medicine men actually use Psi in their practice. So psi phenomena and application are actually deeply rooted in the culture. Some of those doctors, medicine men, they can actually see through your body, and they can scan your body like an X-ray. They can find out where the tumors are, and some of them can even remove it. They can even remove a brain tumor from you after diagnostic. So it's actually been used. I guess it's part of the witch doctor practice. The development of Chinese medicine is also heavily reliant on the psi capability. For example, the property of the Chinese herbs actually was discovered by communication with the plants. They have a very rude kind of 5 elements thing. They describe the property of matter. Yeah, it's like 5 crude properties like food, water, metal, earth, fire. And they classify the herbs according to those 5 properties. The information they get about the property is actually by direct communication with the plant, which is a psi, basically. From the diagnostic point of view, they actually use the psychic viewing. They don't. It's not rely on the physical eye, but they use the so-called third eye to see whether your body is balanced. Those 5 elements, whether they are balanced or not. If they are not balanced, they can use certain herbs to enhance some properties, and use other herbs to overcome some imbalance. So they do use it quite a lot traditionally in the culture. Until end of 19th century, situation changed quite a lot. At that time, China had the Opium War with Britain and was defeated, and also had a war with Japan and also get badly defeated. So there's a lot of humiliation from those defeats. And the Chinese intellectuals lost confidence in traditional Chinese culture. So they proposed to westernize China in order to become a stronger nation and basically follow Japan, because Japan was really successful to copy some of the Western cultures and then become relatively modernized. They become powerful. And so the traditional culture was devalued as superstition in China, beginning from that time. So they introduced the Western science, technology, and the medicine, and to replace the traditional stuff. The bottom of the decline happened during the Cultural Revolution. So that was a really huge damage to the tradition. And I was actually grew up from that period in 60s. And therefore, there's very little taught about the Chinese tradition. And they replaced it with communism and Maoism. Mao's death in 1976 marked the end of Cultural Revolution. Before 1976, there's really a declining suppression of the traditional culture. Of course, psi, no one's mentioning. It's part of the superstition. Things happened after Mao's death in 1979. Actually, there's a newspaper reported a 12-year-old boy called Tang Yu, who can actually reading by ear. This actually triggered a lot of interest. And this article followed by widespread discovery of children claiming to have ESP, typically touch reading and PK. Research groups to investigate psi were formed in majority of education and research centers. You're talking about more than 100 universities and research institutes to research psi phenomena, because a lot of children are claiming to have these abilities. They have several journals publish research papers on psi during that time. So there's a lot of publication happened during 80s and 90s. Also, there's a major proponent of Psi research. His name is Qian Xuesen, and he is a rocket scientist, and he was a professor in MIT doing rocket research. He actually, after the war, he went to Germany to interview some of the rocket scientists, Nazi scientists. So he was involved in military research as well in the US. But in 1950s, he returned to China, and he was given a task of leading the Chinese rocket and space program. And so he's really keen to support these activities. And his position reached the vice minister of some defense-related industry ministry. So he's kind of quite powerful figures in China, both in science and in politics. And he's really supporting this. He called the activity somatic science, which is integration of traditional Chinese medicine, Qigong, and Psi. Some of the quotes here include somatic science is the Everest of science. It could lead to new scientific revolution that is even greater than quantum mechanics and general relativity. And it will trigger the second renaissance of humanity. You can see that he's really into this. So this helps the booming of Chinese Psi research during 80s and 90s. Official activity started with a Psi research lab called 507 Institute in 1981. So this is under the leadership of Mr. Qian. Investigated some carefully selected psychics, normally highly skilled Qigong practitioners. Civilian researchers in universities spend their own efforts to study Psi, mostly in their off-duty hours. Although it's kind of a sidelines of their research, but there are so many people involved. Actually, you're talking about 100 universities involved in this. So this is quite a lot of activities. You can see. In 80s and 90s, there's a big Qigong movement, and so many people practice Qigong. And as I mentioned, the Qigong and Chinese medicine and Psi are kind of related. Yeah, Qigong is the practice where they using breathing, using concentration, use certain movement like a Tai Chi. They actually try to enhance the flow of Qi energy within the body. So not only you can enhance your health, because if the Qi flows freely in your body along those meridians, and this helps to balance the 5 elements within your body. So that's Chinese medicine theory. Also, by practicing Qigong, at some stage, you acquire the ability of Psi. So it's actually, there's a systematic training to acquire Psi. There's so many self-claimed Qigong masters came out to steal the show. They have large number of disciples, and they actually become cult-like organizations. And some of them not only practice Qigong, they also get into politics. They have their own political viewpoint as well, which is not tolerated in China. So in 1999, they actually banned the Qigong activities in a large. Yeah. So they also closed the 507 Institute, and they stopped government funding. So since then, much reduced Psi research activities, and mostly done by retired university academics. And that still carry on until now in China, I mean. So there are still small number of retired university academics still doing some research, but it's very low profile, very low level of activities. So that's a sort of a brief history of Chinese Psi until 1990s. During the heydays of 80s and 90s, there are some star science individuals and researchers, and I just want to focus two of those people. And Professor Shen Jingchuan, he is a professor of Chinese University of Geoscience. He's actually a mineral chemist. He's quite well established academic. He discovered some crystal structure of minerals, and he published paper in Nature at the time. So it was really a rare achievement in China. And in the same university, a lady was discovered. Her name is Sun Chuling. She was working in the library as a librarian. Two of them collaborate together, produce some fantastic work. So I'm going to describe some of them. And by the way, this is the photography Sun produced during that time. I'll go back into those later. Some noteworthy experiment designed by Professor Shen and performed by Sun include the interaction with biological systems, and the seeds can germinate within 10 minutes, under the influence of Sun. She actually does it by talking to the plant, by communicate with the plant. That's quite interesting. So it's a very speedy germination growth. That's one of the experiments they performed. This is the mature of apple. Again, from green apple to mature into sort of red apple and come back again. She can do the reverse as well within 10 minutes. So again, by the use of mind power. This is another experiment where she can change the water, drinking water, to something else. You can see the color change. There's a lot of analysis done. I don't have time to go into details, but she was able to change the property of matters, including water. And she can pass through another solid barriers. And this is one of my favorite experiment, partly due to the reason, actually, Professor Shen used the Crookes tube. William Crookes was the former chairman of SPR. He invented Crookes tube, and this experiment actually used Crookes tube to do the experiment. So in this case, it's very difficult to cheat, because the radiometer works on the principle when you shine the light onto the blades. If the light is strong enough, the blade will start to turn. And in this case, she used her mind to make the blade turning in the reverse direction, which is amazing, which is impossible actually in physics, because the light only pushes one side of the blade, and she managed to turn it reversely by mind. I don't know whether you notice, but there's no acceleration involved from beginning. It's just sudden. If you shine the light, the blade will start to turn and gradually accelerate. In this case, there's not even acceleration, just straight into the full speed. And because it's on the partial vacuum, it's very difficult to cheat, actually, this experiment. So this is my favorite. Another experiment is materialization. This is quite different from materialization from the West. They use Chinese medicine, herbal medicine. They can produce herbal medicine from nowhere, and the medicine actually can be used to heal people. So this is the quite well-known lady And this is her now, actually. This actually, I took the video, and during her teaching, she was teaching some kids to do the materialization of Chinese herbal medicine. So she is a grandmother now, but occasionally she's still getting involved in training kids to do the job. So let's go back to the main topic of this presentation, which is the thoughtography. And she used the polarized film without camera, actually. So she just placed her hand to the film directly. And later on, she didn't even need to touch the film. She can do it remotely. And those are some of the photos she produced, including scenery, more sceneries. Yeah. And some seem to be outer space, and some people, an animal, and she can do the tracing as well, which means she can focus her mind into a small beam and use that beam to write on the polarized film. And those are some of the writings, and this is actually her signature. And there's hundreds of photos, and some are really not recognizable what they are. But they are all produced under a reasonable good control, actually. And so that was in a heyday of Psi activities in the 80s and 90s. Now there's a recent resurgence of interest in Psi. There's many training schools and courses for Psi offered to children as extracurricular activity. So lots of parents actually send their children to those training facilities. They are informal, they are outside school, and they're not controlled by school. And it's reported that 40 to 60% of children around age 10 can be induced to have Psi to some extent. And the training sort of include mind vision, speed reading, photographic memory. So those skills are offered as means to improve school performance. And they have competitions also. This is one of the competitions which are held in Hong Kong, and where different training schools come together to compete with some capabilities. Yeah. So there's a resurgence activities. And some of the schools actually managed to produce some photographs on mobile phone, because everyone has a mobile phone. So it's kind of convenient to use mobile phone instead of polarized film to obtain photography. Yeah, some children actually produce quite a lot of those. Yeah. This is a typical setting for the photography experiment. The kids actually have their phone, and they are checked before the test, and they're given time to focus, to concentrate. And once they produced something, they will call the teacher, and the teacher will come to examine the results. Yeah. So this is one of the teaching facilities, and where they actually done some photography experiment. thoughtography produced, including some recognizable stuff. This is a thoughtography of a book, and according to the child, this actually appeared in his mind vision as part of the training of the photographic memory that actually they can produce also text in their mind, and this got sort of onto the mobile phone. Yeah. And there's a lot of images which are beautiful, but it's not recognizable what they are. Sometimes you have to ask the kids, what actually did you see? What is this all about? And some will tell you what they say, and some have meanings, but not always. So those are the examples. And this particular thoughtography supposed to be some architecture decorations in the another realm of reality. So there are beautiful houses, and this is the building materials actually on their building in the sort of world the mind eye has observed, perceived. This is eye of, according to the child again, according to the child who took the photo, that this is one of the eyes of a myth animal in another realm. The animal doesn't exist in physical level. So this is eyes, and this is the pattern of the myth animal's body. Apparently, he described to his trainers that the animal actually visible very clearly, but when he takes the picture, he can only take very small part. It's like he has to zoom in, but in his mind vision, he can actually see it, the animal. This is an eye of a green dragon. Yeah, so those are. This is one of the people he encountered, the child encountered in the realm of sort of a spiritual level. Although he can see the person very clearly, when he took the picture, it becomes blurred. And this is another photo. This is one of the clearer photos, but I don't really understand what it is. If Bernard Carr join us, he may be able to comment what this planet is. But according to the child, it's not on a physical level. Because limited time, I just gave you some examples what they claim to have taken on their mobile. The methodology is actually very simple. There's a 3-stage process. At the first step, they need to produce a third eye vision or mind eye vision. It's not using their physical eye, they use their mind eye to produce a vision. And the second step is bring a mental version of a film or mobile phone into the vision. And then the third step is actually copy the image onto the film or into the memory card of mobile phone. So Song gave a lot of supervision to those children, and also the trainers of children. So she still can help to develop those capabilities with children. Assuming photography is true, then we have a problem. Because the phenomena actually defies all known physical law of nature. Existing physical science paradigm cannot accommodate it. It cannot explain it. Yeah, it defines all the mechanism. For example, you're supposed to have photons to reach a film or reach sort of a semiconductor receiver in mobile phone to receive an image. You need the photons. But in thoughtography, there's no photons involved, at least not directly. So it's very difficult to explain because no one can sort of understand it. This phenomenon is largely dismissed as a fraud, as a fake. So, but I have seen it. I am personally involved in some of the experiment. I'm convinced actually that it is true. Yeah, it can happen. So I think alternative paradigm is needed to make sense of the phenomena. Yeah. A lot like many other science phenomena, we have empirical data, we have evidence, but if the data is not coupled with the theory, and then it's not meaningful. If it's not meaningful, it's not impactful. They don't get recognized, they get ignored. That's why I think it's quite important actually to have a theory to explain it. It has to be alternative theory. So in order to develop a theory, let's go back to the basics, how we actually develop theories. And so we actually use metaphors to develop models. And for example, if we don't know what elephant look like, we need a lot of conceptual tools as a metaphor. So we have you need to have a fence or tubes or pillars or walls to describe an elephant. Similarly, we use metaphors to develop the nature. In mechanical time, we use a clock as a metaphor. And in electrification time, we use electricity. We use electrically charged particle as a metaphor. And nowadays, it's information age. We have different conceptual tools like computer, big data, cloud computing, virtual reality, artificial intelligence. Those concepts tools give us new metaphors to develop models of reality. So since the 60s, there's already a lot of pioneers developed the idea. So Conrad Rose thinks the entire universe is being computed on a computer. John Wheeler had a famous phrase called "it from bit," all things physical are information, theoretical in origin. And Edward Fredkin says there's this place other than hosted engine that runs the physics. Those are the pioneers. And those are the followers, including philosophers and theoretical physicists and biologists and technology leaders. The idea is actually getting popular, but it still remains a speculation, it's not a theory. So to sort of develop an idea into a theory, I think we need to answer some basic questions like where is the computer? Where does it come from? What is it made of? How it's built? What are its property and who is the programmer? So the model I have developed basically is to answer those questions. I assume this model is based on Platonism. So Plato, according to Plato, the material world, material existence is a shadow of poor imitation, poor copy of a Platonic world. So apply the same principle because we have a physical computer made of silicon. I assume there's a Platonic computer in a Platonic realm. This Platonic computer made of consciousness produce physical universe as a processing output of the computation. So this is the basic framework of my model. I don't have time to go into detail, but if you're interested, you can look into my previous talks, which I had more time to talk about this. Basically, the consciousness digitalizes itself, so it becomes zeros, ones, and become computable. And the processing, computation, produce the universe. Also, I have the working definition of what consciousness is. I define the consciousness as the potential power to conceive, to perceive, and to be self-aware. So this is my definition of consciousness. And if I can summarize the model, which is we have a presumption of existence of an operating computer in Platonic realm. The Platonic computer is made by, of, with, from consciousness, i.e. consciousness is hardware as well as software for the Platonic computer. Consciousness, which is the power to conceive, to perceive, and to be self-aware, is the most fundamental and irreducible existence. Space and its contents in multiverse arise from consciousness via computational processing of Platonic computer. More detail you can find in a peer-reviewed paper published in a journal in American Philosophical Association. So what we are trying to do here is to alternative paradigm. If we compare with the traditional physical science paradigm, you can see it's quite different. In the traditional science paradigm, we have a matter as a primary. We use reductionism. We use mathematics, formulas and equations as a tool. In the new model, we use consciousness as a primary. We use holism, which is programming. And we use computation as a tool to solve those problems. So with the new paradigm, it offers a new perspective to the universe. Yeah, for example, the 3D space is a processing output of Platonic computation. So the space is actually not given. It's produced by computation. Without computation, we don't even have a space. The law of nature describes by physics can be seen as a approximation programming subroutine in Platonic computer. So the program determines the gravity, determines the mechanism. The physical property is programmed into the image. So for example, those are basic images, but by programming, they can exhibit physical properties. Yeah, if you use the conservation of momentum in your programming, you can actually make an image physical, okay? So you can make it solid. The so-called material actually is a set of images produced by computer, but programmed to behave as though they have a physical. So if we see the world as a processing output of a computation, then we can actually understand a lot of psi phenomena. Yeah, for example, if the law of physics is basically a set of program, if we can get into the programming, we can we can alter the program. For example, if we suspend gravity, then we can have a levitation. And if we suspend the solidity program, and we can make the solid, the so-called solid, have a different property. And in this case, the solids are no longer solid as such, but they are just images. One image can pass through another image. So we can explain a lot of phenomena. Another important inference of this model is that there exists level of creation, i.e. multiverse. Yeah, because the computer actually can be configured to operate at a different clock speed. At a different clock speed, you can output a different universe, and those universes can be parallel, and they are produced by the computer operating at a different clock speed. We can say that physical universe is only one of many parallel universes. In the level of a physical universe, we have a set of virtual reality images which are defined by a set of rules, algorithm. We call it physics. So it's a packet program called physics. If we define those images, we have a physical universe. And at other parallel universes, we don't have to have physics. We can have a different set of rules. Yeah. So if we don't have solidity program, and then we can go through solids or the image of solids. And different parallel universes can be accessed by tuning into different vibration frequencies. In this case, it's basically clock speed of computation of a particular universe. It's just like tuning old radio, old TV. If we can tune in different frequency, we receive the different information, and that information is the base of reality. So we construct a different reality at a different level of parallel universes. So what is non-physical existence? We also define the non-physical existence as a perception experienced when physical eyes are not in operation. So we use our physical eyes to perceive the physical reality, and we use something else to perceive parallel universe. For example, in dream state, in meditative state, in near-death state, and in psychedelic state. Yeah, we don't use our physical eyes, but we can experience vivid reality, sometimes even realer than the physical reality. So this shouldn't be just dismissed as illusion. The physical universe is perceived through physical eyes, as I mentioned. The non-physical existence is perceived through third eye or mind eye. So we use different instruments to perceive different level of reality. The idea of a third eye is actually widespread in different spiritual traditions, like in Hinduism, in Buddhism, in Taoism, East, in shamanic traditions in America, also in early Christian tradition in Middle East and Europe. Yeah. In Matthew, Jesus actually said that the light of the body is the eye. If therefore thy eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. So the single eye, yeah, it's not the physical eye. So with the non-physical eye, mind eye or the third eye, we can perceive a different level of reality. So what should be the mechanism for thoughtography? According to the metacomputics model I briefly described, the multiverse is a digital information system, like we have described here. We have a metacomputation system, which is a digital system. We actually know within a digital information system, images from one display can be airdropped to another display. Those who have iPhone or actually any other phones will know that image can be airdropped from one phone to another. So it's just a matter of protocol in your programming. If it's an information system, and you can airdrop image. So this actually can be used as a simulation of what I'm going to describe. Therefore, images displayed in a psychic's mind vision should be able to be airdropped onto a photographic film or mobile phone cameras. Multiverse is a digital information system, and if you can get the protocol right, you can program the right, you can drop image from one display to another. So this is what I proposed as a mechanism for photography. I reached my time, and I just quickly mentioned what are the implications of photography. To my mind, it's a potential powerful tool to make private experience public. Yeah. We have a lot of inner, we call it inner experience, which is a private. But with a photographer can potentially able to make it public, but basically to print it out. So this will be an accelerator for development of non-physical science, because we already get used to sort of treat public data. Yeah, we are not used to treating, to research, to investigate private data. By photography, we can make private data public. Therefore, it can be so help it become a respected science. And also, it's a enable technology to explore and study parallel universes. The psychic can be compared to the Columbus, who explored a new continent and even map it out. So with the psychics who can explore those territories in parallel universes, hopefully can map them out. And then rest of us can sort of understand what's going on in the cosmos. Yeah, so basically we expand our human capability, and we can actually support humanity to become a multi-universe species. Elon Musk actually tried to push human race as a multi-planetary species. He's building rockets to send people onto Mars. But actually, although you can send people on Mars, it's still in the physical universe. We actually, I believe, we have potential to become a multi-universe species. Once we have a map, once we have a lot of information about the other parallel universes, we'll be able to, maybe we can make it ourselves. Yeah. If we know the territory exists and we have a map, then it's easier for the rest of us to explore that as well. So we become a multi-universe species. In summary, I want to say that photography continues to appear as intriguing phenomena. Yeah, it didn't actually stop. It's still happening. Methodology for photography has been established as a technique, and it's been proven actually it can be taught to others. Photography can be explained by introducing a hypothesis, which is the model I described. In that model, the reality is a digital information system. Photographic applications would have immense implications. So this is the end of my talk, and thank you for listening. Thank you for your attention. And if you have further questions, you can raise during the discussion, or you can email me here in my mailbox. Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much, Simon. Excellent talk. Just make sure I'm on. Yeah, thank you very much. Really, really interesting talk. Some very, very interesting research going on there. I mean, again, I'm going to plug this. I really think that there seems like there's a lot of research going on in China to do with parapsychology, psychic research, however we're going to frame that, that doesn't get aired or published outside of China. I mean, we just don't hear about these things, and that's that's a tragedy of epic proportions. So first of all, we need somebody. And I'm looking at you as I say this to summarize the research that's going on there, perhaps for a good article for JSPR. I think that would be very, very interesting for the readers, or maybe even it's not the Paranormal Review anymore. I noticed it changed the title, but I'll still call it the Paranormal Review, but for the magazine, something like that. I think that would be very interesting. So something to consider, perhaps.
Yeah, okay. I would love to.
And if I can help, let me know. Right.
Oh, thank you. There's a lot of information. I have a lot of information. It's just a matter of finding the time to
collate it.
Yeah,
I just think there's so many interesting findings there. But let's come. Come to the questions. So just a reminder, as always, if you have a question, please post your question up on the Q&A board, and I'll get to it in a minute, and then we'll come to that as part of the discussion. I just want to address David Burns' question in the chat, though, because David was just raised this as you were talking about the children, sort of, I suppose, airdropping an image from their mind, thoughtography, onto their mobile phones. When you were talking about that as a sort of research, or not research project, but they were training this in the schools, and he was just wondering precisely how that happened, in the sense of is the camera triggered by something? How does the teacher know what to look at? I mean, is there a very strict procedure that the children follow when they're doing that?
Yeah, I briefly described that there's 3 steps. And the children, before photography training, they already have a lot of trainings. They normally begin by recognize information on paper by touching, by using their hand. That's normally the beginning of the training. And at the sort of advanced training, they can routinely produce images without a physical eye, and we call it third eye. So once they have a stable image in the third eye, and then they can manipulate that image easier. So they can bring a camera into that vision. Yeah, for example, they can even actually operate a non-physical camera in their mind vision. Sometimes they can even press a shutter, for example. Yeah, that also happens. There's actually more than one way to do the job. Some have to sort of use their mind finger to press a trigger, the shutter. Some can just give instruction. Yeah, give a verbal instruction for the camera to operate.
Okay, that's interesting. And it's interesting to think, and I think it's a really important point as well, not to fall into the trap of thinking that there is just one way of doing this.
No.
We often live in, particularly in the West, I think as well, we always set these things up as either or. It's either this or it's that. It's either this way of doing it or that, whereas it often can be both and. There are just many different ways of doing things.
Right.
Caroline raised the point, which I had in my head as well, and it's all to do about cultural influences. And she just says, in your dealings with people in the UK, in Britain, in your line of work, do you find that they are less receptive to paranormal than perhaps people in China?
I think it's actually similar. Yeah.
Really, and that does surprise me, because to me it seems like there's a particularly when you look at the children. I mean, it's almost not impossible, but I'd struggle to sort of conceptualize in my head a school in England where parents sent their children to a school to practice, I don't know, this, seeing, all these things. Okay. But, I think that's a really good thing to do. But, I just think there seems to indicate a greater cultural acceptance, perhaps, of these things than in the UK.
Yeah, to a certain extent. But I also want to mention the parents are very small minorities who actually believe this. Yeah. The mainstream community, the mainstream scientific community still dismiss anything psi. Yeah.
So it's very similar then in that sense that it's still
very similar.
On the, I'm going to call it the edge. I don't think it's the fringe. I think it's the cutting edge. When people say, in the fringe, I say, no, we're not. We're at the cutting edge of understanding the relationship, the impact, the implications of consciousness on these things. I think that's very important.
Yeah, mainstream media would treat this as a fraud. Yeah. Yeah. So, but there's always very minority parents who actually take it as an interesting phenomenon. And although it's a small percentage, because China has a big population, you still have a lot of children come through.
What are the age groups of these children?
Around 10. Yeah, in a primary school. Yeah.
And so it seems that it's more the parents that perhaps encourage them to go to these.
Parents, mainly parents. Yeah. Okay, those children, they don't know themselves, of course, but some parents get sort of informed about this, and they want their children to do well in school and in the future, and they hope that this will help them to do that.
Do you think then that the children approach this in a more open-minded way because they haven't got those biases that the adults have?
Yeah, children are actually natural psychic. Yeah, they many of them already have it, so it's very easy to train them. Okay. Yeah, sometimes you just put children together, and they learn from each other. So it's not that difficult. Only when they grow up, when they go to sort of middle school, and they lose it. Yeah.
Okay. So Graham is asking an interesting question. It's more sort of neuroscience. Just saying, do you know of any research studies examining the brains or psychophysiology of those individuals that take part in these thoughtography experiments? So I suppose the question then is there anything unusual, different or unique that we know of about how their brains may work?
The short answer is I don't know. There hasn't been any work done in China on sort of a brain sort of examination, and those activities are, as I mentioned, it's a very sort of low profile, without any funding, and it's almost like a hobbyist, and people just use their spare time to do some very simple experiment. And there's a lot of brain research activities, of course, in China as well, but those scientists don't have any interest in this.
Inside, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is a shame, because I think that, perhaps if we repackaged it as understanding consciousness, and I think that would be perhaps a way to do that. Because this is, for me, fundamentally, this is really what we're always talking about, this fundamental level of consciousness. That's what we're really trying to get at, how we as individuals either link or emerge from or are part of that sort of fundamental level.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, there is no sort of a serious research involving brain scientists.
Okay, so Malcolm has a question, because you mentioned as well about, and even your model seems very digital. It's quite a computational model, and it says, if this reality is all digital, what does that mean for analog signals? So is it purely just digital?
Yeah, I think the nature is fundamentally digital, and of course, digital can be transformed into analog signal, and analog signal can be converted into digital. Yeah, but I think fundamentally it's digital, and the digital is the simplest information form, actually, just zeros, ones, and the analog signal are secondary. It's to my mind, it's a processed signal already.
Okay. Okay. This is a very interesting question from Siobhan. Thanks, Siobhan. This is really interesting because this starts to ask about, is it possible that we can obtain any information about the techniques that these children are taught in these schools? You know, is anything about that published, or, you know, what sort of techniques are they taught to do this? Do they follow a particular procedure?
Yeah, they have certain steps to move them on to thoughtography. The main sort of training is the mind vision, a stable mind vision. In terms of publication, I don't think there's publication in English. There are a small number of fringe journals in Chinese, including journals in Taiwan, publish those kind of research, but I'm not aware it's in English language.
That is a shame. But it's interesting that you mention a stable mind vision. You know, when you say that, I immediately think of a sort of meditative, idea of meditation, which is a sort of, you know, relaxed but focused attention. And it's that notion of relaxation but focused attention on something. In this instance, it could be an image, I suppose.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. They have a very clear images with the advanced level of meditation. And the image can be very clear and can look as real or even realer than what we see with our physical eyes.
Yeah, and Janet makes an interesting point in the chat, just saying that, you know, perhaps we could start by teaching children mindfulness here in the UK, or, you know, which I'm not going to get on my hobby horse about meditation and the benefits, but, you know, it's staggering. I remember writing about this back in 2008, and even then they were saying, you know, if we could teach children, you know, meditation techniques, mindfulness, you know, if you started out a few minutes each day and built that over time, by the time they reach their sort of teenage years, it would be a natural thing to do. And just think about how, because I always think it's one of those things that we don't really teach children how to think, or, you know, how to use their mind in any way. We just keep throwing information at them, and we do this all the way through education. We just chuck information at them as if they're sort of, you know, sponges, and we just say, right, you know, pick it up, remember this, and move on. And I just think that if we were able to help them focus their attention for a few, you know, start off for a few minutes each day and build on that, I think it would have tremendous benefits. And I'd like to think as well that it would have such benefits in reducing the huge increases we see here in attention problems that children seem to be exhibiting.
I agree. I fully agree. Yeah.
Sorry, that's a little bit of a hobby horse of mine. Apologies, everybody. I've been ranting on that one for a long time.
It's relevant to the
yeah.
With meditation, you can uncover a lot of innate capabilities, including sight.
Yeah. Absolutely. Graham asks an interesting question about, I want to make sure I get this right, qi. So I think it says, how does qi come into thoughtography mechanisms? Or does it?
It's not a major contribution. Practicing qi is a way of cultivate your concentration and calm your mind, and also make your body more balanced. So it's not a direct contribution to thoughtography, but I think it's a direct contribution to a lot of healing. Yeah, a lot of healings make use of qi directly. For example, they can sort of emit qi into your meridian system to clear some blockages. So that's the main use of main application of qi, mainly in sort of meridian clearance. But I don't think it's not that direct relevance to thoughtography.
Okay. Bernard, and unsurprisingly, has a physics-related point to make. So thanks very much, Bernard. Nice to hear from you as well. So he says there are several kinds of multiverse in physics, but the notion is sometimes dismissed as philosophy rather than science, because because you can't really interact with these other potential universes. Your kind of multiverse, this one associated with different types of frequencies, this is quite interesting because it avoids this criticism, he says. Do you have any comments on this?
Yeah, I totally agree with Bernard. Bernard is also interested in frequency and time, and all those are my very much interest also. So I hope I can follow up with more discussion with Bernard. I agree with Bernard's comment. The existing sort of multiverse hypothesis doesn't really give any description of multiverse, and mathematically it proves it exists, but it doesn't give any description and doesn't give any testable hypotheses. And so it's in my mind, it's not a good theory. The sort of parallel universe I'm proposing, it's actually different. I borrow the name from physics because they already mathematically proven it exists. I borrow that terminology, but actually I use it to sort of to classify phenomena which are non-physical. Yeah, so it's like a shelf in the warehouse. I put my non-physical experience into another parallel universe. And in that way, the sort of system becomes very clearer. You put physical phenomena, which are governed by physics, into the physical universe. You have a non-physical phenomena, like we experience in dreaming, in psychedelics, in meditation, into another level of reality, and which have a different timeline operating. That's our common interest with Bernard, because the time get into this. The clock, the speed of clock, which is also related to the vibration frequency, which spirits practitioners talk a lot about the vibration frequency. In this model, I relate vibration frequency into the clock speed of computation. So this sort of reconciles a lot of things, a lot of concepts.
Okay, so Hilary has a query, really. Thank you very much, Hilary. So she asks, should a different theory of reality be treated as hard science, or could there be a shift away from this? I suppose it's a way of saying, do we have to set this up as an alternative theory, or is it just something we can pursue alongside our current understanding, perhaps?
I think theory is not. Theory is never hard, actually. Yeah, empirical evidence, empirical data can be hard. Yeah, theory is never hard. They change. Yeah, they develop.
Couldn't you argue? I mean, certainly from Psi, couldn't you argue that if you take Psi as data, for me, certainly one of the few, if any, ways of trying to explain that is the requirement for a new theory of, if you like, consciousness, or however, the universe, however we're going to frame that. In terms of, if you take this view of consciousness being fundamental, then that makes those findings from Psi research far easier to account for.
Yeah,
and that's how we move forward in our understanding of theories, because the current theory, we're butting up against this. We've got these findings that keep coming out, and they keep coming out year after year, despite the skeptics and naysayers. The evidence is there. It's not always consistent. It's not always replication on demand, but that's very true of very many aspects of human behavior. Look at the field of psychology is replete with lots of things that come out, and it's really difficult to get them to emerge again. I mean, creativity is a good example for me, which I've done research in that field a number of years ago, and it's a classic example. You can't just say to people, right, be creative. It just doesn't work that way. In the same way, I think asking people to, or trying to elicit these effects from people is a similar thing. So I think there's I think once the current theories can't account for those findings, that's when we start to look for better theories.
Yes,
I think that's where we are at the moment. I think I've absolutely head for a shift.
You need both, actually. I think empirical data and theory are like two engines of the airplane. And if you only have one engine, you go round and round. Yeah. The physical science has moved so far in the last 400 years because they have both propellers to push it. They have empirical data, they have method of acquiring empirical data, and they have history, they have a theory to make sense of those data. And the theory can trigger new experiment because they propose the hypothesis which needs new experiment to verify it. And they generate more data through this process. It becomes a positive feedback, and both engine operates. Yeah. In the sci, we have, I think we have more than 150 years of empirical data.
Yeah.
But the theory is hard to come by. And therefore, the data, all right, although some data is quite hard, actually, because there's no theory, you cannot make sense of it.
That's definitely the struggle.
Make sense.
That's
if
the struggle.
It doesn't make sense, people don't accept it. They dismiss it.
That's where we need to, perhaps as researchers, focus some of our efforts. And I suppose that's a challenge because, in the way the world works, we have to pay the, whatever you call it, pay the taskmaster or whatever the phrase is, but we've got to, with our jobs, we have to publish, and it's much easier to do the empirical research in that sense and publish the paper each year, or a stepwise understanding of a particular phenomenon. Theoretical research is much more longer term and can be much slower and is much more challenging.
It is. The problem is if you only have one engine, and you
go round in circles.
Yeah. So no matter how big the database is, if the data doesn't make sense, you don't get very far. Yeah.
So perhaps that's a call for us to think a bit more about theories and theoretical development. Now, I know there are theories out there before you all start emailing me about those. Yeah. Right. So next question from Mara. Thanks, Mara, for this. She says, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I wonder, with regard to the photography and thoughtography, where the role of light and photons fit into this Platonic model and its execution in our perceived Newtonian reality. So how would you account for that?
So in physical science paradigm, you need the photons to hit the film or hit the camera to produce image. In thoughtography, there isn't a photon in operation. And you don't use light. You don't use the physical light. Yeah, in the absence of photon, there isn't physical light. But you use your mind to create image, which sometimes have absence of light also. Sometimes you actually produce black image. Yeah, I have a lot of black images also, which is not exposed, but it actually appears in the camera after the session. Yeah. So in some cases, actually, there's only black image, which is quite similar to just you operate the shutter without open the camera. But in many cases, you have a different level of lighting, but those lightings are not physical light. That's the tricky bit. Yeah. It's in your mind vision. Yeah. Even in your dark room, in a pitch black dark room, you can still produce those images. Yeah.
So, and that would make sense when you take the view that it's information, if you like, that's creating the image, not light photons.
No, it's not light photons.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So hopefully that answers your question as well, Mara. Light photons, not psi, unless, actually we need to be careful. Of course, we don't want to throw out any ideas at this stage. It's important to, always be open-minded about these things.
That's right. Yeah, and all theories are to be tested. All hypotheses needs to be verified.
Yeah.
And that's why I said a theory is not hard.
Yeah. Okay, last question from Janet. And she talks about dowsers, so people who dowse for water, for example, when they try and find water underground, and they might dowse for this using rods or whatever it is. She asks, are there dowsers in China? Because these people seem to be able to produce effects. They find water, but no one's clear about how it works. So perhaps that's a useful model. If people can produce something that works, then how it works might not be as important as the fact that it produces something that's useful.
So I've never seen any dowsing practice in China. But I know these people use psychic ability to find water on the ground. They don't have the practice like in the West. They have wires, they have things to use. But they actually, they can perceive directly. Like Miss Song, she discovered her capability when she was quite young, maybe 5 or 6. She can see what's on the ground. Yeah. And she said, there's a sort of a pottery here. And her parents actually dig it and they find it. And so there are people using this to find mines as well. Yeah, find other mines.
Oh, wow.
Not only water. Yeah.
Okay.
They don't have the dowsing practice.
Interesting.
It's not necessary, actually. I think it's helpful tools, but it's not necessary.
Well, I suppose it sort of hints at this notion that if thoughtography or any area of psi generally, and I think Russell Targ said this in his work before, this idea that if psi proved itself to be useful or beneficial in some way to individuals, society, or the example they use with, for example, associative remote viewing, is that if people can make money out of it, then suddenly, I think it would become far more widely accepted. People wouldn't worry so much about how it works, but they would accept the fact that it does work. Then perhaps more effort might be put into trying to understand how, given this sort of greater acceptance. We haven't quite reached that. We haven't quite reached that stage.
That's an important factor to consider in progress
psi applications.
Psi applications, yeah, because if it's useful, and people will accept it. It's true. Yeah.
Excellent.
Even in science also. I mean, in Galileo's time, none of his experiment proved the Earth is orbiting around the sun. Yeah, people at the time eventually accept the theory. It's because it's useful. It's not because it's proven. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's why the majority of my work is also finding applications in other things. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, let me wrap up there and remind everybody before we go that on the 26th of July, Monday the 26th, we have Rodrigo Tavares. I hope, apologies, Rodrigo, if I didn't pronounce that right. Rodrigo is going to be talking or giving a presentation on the psychical research of Sir William Crook.